Hello everyone, I'm Karen Davila and it is such a privilege to have been invited to do a special edition of Tatler Talks. Thank you, Tatler, for having me. And today we have a special interviewee, one of a kind. They say big things come in small packages, and in this case, it's quite literal. She was my former boss and Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Ressa. Hello.
Karen,
now,
it's
I
good
have
to
to
be here.
say, it's surreal to be in front of you today.
It's wonderful to be with you.
It's like, I've known you for a long time, but I don't know, it's a different aura, a different person. Do you feel any different?
I'm much more conscious about where we came from and where we're going to be, and kind of what we have to do to get to a future we want to be in,
Winning the Academy Awards or winning any other kind of awards, maybe people can imagine, but not the Nobel Prize.
I couldn't have imagined it. It was shocking. And then to kind of look at all the statistics, I was the only woman in 2021. And since the time the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded, only the 18th out of over 1,000. So I felt like it's almost crushing the responsibility, writing that speech was one of the most difficult things to do. So I think what we do with it is the challenge now.
How did you get here? I'm sure you've asked yourself.
I don't really think about the world that way. We were talking about this before. I think about living a life that has meaning. When you're a journalist, we wrote the standards and ethics manuals. I've been in 4 different news groups where I've helped write standards and ethics manuals. So that's like an honor code, right? And you realize that for all of us, we each try to build our life, and we try to build it looking for meaning. In the age of social media, meaning is so much harder to find, right? But what I learned really early on is that meaning isn't something someone gives you, or someone draws a map and you have meaning. It's every single little choice you make that builds meaning in your life. We've talked about this a lot over the years, and I think in my case, it was journalism that gave me that first big. It made me draw lines. When I was younger than that, it was the golden rule, something very simple. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that's built into my belief system. So how do you get here? I don't think you can set out to get an award. I think that makes you a cartoon version of yourself. I think what you try to do is you build a life of meaning. And then these things happen. I think this is the same way that, someone will ask, so how do I make money? If your goal is to make money, you will not be the best person you can be, because you'll be a cartoon version of yourself, right? You look for what you love, you become very good at it, you put in your 10,000 hours, and if you do these things, and maybe I'm foolish, but I'm pretty old now, and I still believe in these ideals. You choose. Journalism gave me a sense of mission, a sense of purpose. It gave my life meaning. And it's actually, for all of the problems that we've had in it's going to be 6 years of the Duterte administration, it forced me to really define who I was. I always believed in these values, but values that are untested, you don't really know. So you don't know who you are until you're forced to fight for it. What a long answer to your question. I guess, the best way that I can say is, you live the best life you think you can do. And you do that by setting goals outside of yourself. And this is the same thing I say for Rappler or tech. You look at impact. You don't look at gain. When it's too self-interested, when it is about you, you become a grotesque version. This is what I think.
You had a very powerful speech. It's actually, for those who know you well, it's a mix of how you really are in person. You wear your heart on your sleeve. You're vulnerable. You're quite open. And many people may think that Maria Ressa is a woman that's just tough, fighting every day. But people who know you actually know you to be someone that's quite optimistic, hopeful. How did you write that speech, and what made you decide to include the facets in the speech?
So I think first is, an idea of strength, right? What is strength? We've also had this discussion. I think that you have to drop your shields in order to be open to other people, right? Because if you have your shields up, then they will have their shields up, right? So for me, you mentioned the word vulnerability. I think that is the state where you can be empathetic, right? So that's
because you were teary-eyed.
Maybe part of it is I don't think it's a triumphant moment. I think that this was something I told Rappler when we heard the announcement. A few hours later, we had a small meeting. This prize, people think it's a chance to celebrate, but it's also a signal that things could get a lot worse. So, the last time a journalist was given this prize was almost 80 years, 1935. He was named, and then he got the prize in 1936. And he languished in a Nazi concentration camp. So that was the first thing I put in the speech, right? Because World War II, fascism, the atom bomb, the worst of what humanity can do to itself, the Nobel Committee was signaling, we're here again. This is it. And that's part of the reason it's so much bigger than us, right? So yeah, you asked me what I wanted to put in the speech. I think the first was, just from your question, what's strength? Too often people think strength is like a brick wall, but I don't think that's strength. I used to have this debate. If you so I worked at CNN for almost 20 years, right? And, American idea of strength is like, an oak tree. It looks so big, imposing, the roots. And I like to think of strength as like the bamboo, because while it looks really flimsy, when a typhoon comes along, or a cyclone in the case of the oak, that oak will be ripped up and die, while the bamboo will sway with the winds and be back up standing after it's over. So strength comes from vulnerability, empathy. It's because how do you make the right decisions? You have to actually be open to all of the inputs. Who thinks they're infallible? So anyway, so all of these things were there, right? I mean, I had the hardest time writing the Nobel lecture because, oh my gosh, because I knew what was at stake for the Philippines, for journalists, and frankly, for the world. We have so much riding at this moment in time. Obviously, I've been talking for 5 years about the role technology has played in manipulating people all around the world, in destroying democracy. The Philippines itself, we are at an existential moment. And it's not even up to us. It doesn't matter how we vote. If the information ecosystem determined by social media, these American social media platforms, if that doesn't change, we can't have integrity of elections. And a line I put into almost every speech, we will not have integrity of elections if we don't have integrity of facts. And right now, we don't have integrity of facts.
That's one of the bravest speeches actually made, at least the ones I've seen in this year's Nobel Prize awarding. And you call out by name Mark Zuckerberg, in which you got praises for that, because you've used that platform to call his attention once again, and you've done that personally. And do you think he listened?
Oh, if he doesn't, he'll single-handedly drive the world to fascism. That's a huge responsibility. But, if you look at Facebook and you look at the man who now has this huge power, there's this illusion of flatness. They have open spaces where they're all supposedly the same, but the reality is it isn't flat. Nothing in the world is flat. People make decisions, and if you keep it at flat, you don't become accountable for your decisions. So Mark Zuckerberg has, he's not the leader of a country. He is the leader of a company that controls now the way humanity behaves. That's daunting, and it has caused violence that's unimaginable, genocide in Myanmar. What are we living through in the Philippines, right? What have we accepted?
Are you satisfied with what he's done so far?
No, absolutely not. I have nothing against him. When I met him, he was just he had just turned 30, I think. He was 33, so this was in 2017. And he's bright. He's a bright man, but when I was trying to tell him how important Facebook was in the Philippines, at that point, 97% of Filipinos on the internet were on Facebook. And when I told him that, I was trying to convince him, I invited him to come to the Philippines. And what he said was, he frowned. And I thought, oh my gosh, did I say something wrong? Maybe my fact was wrong. Then he just said, Maria, what are the other 3% doing?
God.
And this is what every single... There's a new book that's come out by New York Times reporters. There's Frances Haugen, who has come out with more than 10,000 internal documents from inside Facebook. And what we've seen is the phrase of Mark Zuckerberg, company over country, the repeated decisions of Facebook to continue making decisions that are harmful to its users. And this is now documented. So we know about this. I think it's time for us to demand better.
Mm-hmm. In your speech, you also mentioned by name no less than former Senator Bongbong Marcos. And you drew the line that I've heard several reactions. Some saying, did Maria Ressa already cross the line as a journalist by making that particular stand?
It's a fact. Everything that I stated there were facts. He is the son of a former dictator. He was charged with crimes. His names were on some of those documents. And I pointed out that it is ironic that 35 years after his family was ousted in a people power revolt, you have Ferdinand Marcos Jr. now coming in as the top presidential candidate, right? That's irony, and that's a fact as well. All the latest surveys show us that. But I think more than anything, I wanted to point out that Bongbong Marcos has been insidiously manipulating public opinion since at least 2015. That is a fact as well. The data, the evidence, the networks of disinformation that we've uncovered, the Cambridge Analytica, one of the whistleblowers, Brittany Kaiser, actually said that they had dealt with the Marcos family. So these are not things that, that are, I didn't make them up, nor did I try to convince you of anything. These are facts. And the reality is that to avoid those facts is actually taking a position as well.
That's a good one. But I wanted to ask you first, by mentioning his name and putting your position out there, doesn't that compromise Rappler in any way in the upcoming election coverage?
Not at all. I think that when you live in an environment where lies become facts, you need to be very clear about what the facts are, number one. Number two, not mentioning that is taking a position. And that is actually taking a position for Bongbong Marcos, right? I am giving you the facts, right? And I think that's what happens when propagandists take over the information ecosystem. They assume that you give the facts for a reason, when in the end, these are just the facts. So no, I guess the other part I have to say is since November last year, I've also pulled back from I don't have an editorial position in Rappler anymore, largely because it's impossible to pretend that this government was not attacking me, was not trying to put me in jail, has not taken immense resources from both me and Rappler by trying to stifle our ability to do investigative reporting that will hold it to account. It has done this not just to Rappler, but to every journalist in the Philippines. So, I think the only difference is that I just don't shut up. And I think we shouldn't, because silence is complicity.
Were you always this brave? Let's start first with this. Cases were filed against you. I mean, one was dismissed just recently, but two were dismissed, and I think you have 5 others.
I have 7 more. So there were actually, at the beginning in 2018, there were 11 cases. And then they slowly narrowed it down. At the worst, by 2019, I got my first arrest warrant, and in less than 2 years, I had 10 arrest warrants.
So I want to ask Maria Ressa, the human being, were you ever scared at any point?
You're always scared. I mean, I'm shocked that this country has allowed these things to happen. And, to whoever watching, you have allowed these things, right? Rule of law is fragile. And when we give these repeated, I called it death by 1,000 cuts, when we allow a political reason for filing a case to flourish, you weaken the entire system of rule of law. I have no choice but to have faith in the judges who are holding these cases. They were politically motivated. They haven't worked. But we will fight and win them in court. And I appeal to the justices, to the judges, to go back to the rule of law, right? So I'm shocked. First of all, every new thing was different, right?
Yeah.
Did I ever think I'd be arrested? No. Did I ever think that I would be repeatedly arrested? Absolutely not. Did I ever think that the law would be weaponized? No. But what do you do when you're confronted with that reality, right? Do you buckle down and accept it? No, right? I know my rights were violated. And because they are, I can say it with certainty.
Do you believe, Maria, it has something to do with how you were brought up? I mean, many Filipinos, their rights have been violated, but I don't have to name names you've seen, that it's instinctive. Well, not generally, but Filipinos would tend to keep quiet, wait it out, not speak. And you've seen that in recent years. I mean, with what's happened to ABS-CBN fought, but some said we could have fought more. So do you think it's cultural for you? I mean, how you became this person? Every single parent out there would want to raise a bold, courageous child.
I am a product of the Philippines as much as I am of the United States and of the schools that I went to, of the friends that I've had, right? We shape each other. And I think it's tough to answer that question, but I will say this. I always have a guiding light.
Yeah.
When I was much younger, the guiding light, when I had to make a decision, was, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because that's really simple, right? How do I want to be treated? That's the way I will treat someone else. Then I got to Princeton and the honor code, and I've told ABS-CBN about this because we used the honor code when we were reforming and creating our own standards and ethics manual. I love the honor code because it does this, right? For every person who signs the honor code, you pledge not just not to cheat, right? You pledge your honor, but you also pledge to report anyone else you see who is violating the honor code. Right?
You see, in the Philippines, that would be frowned upon. They'd call you a snitch, right?
And this is why we have pandemic corruption, right? Because you become complicit. I go back to that phrase, silence is complicity, right? When will you allow the mafia to rule? Well, we've kind of done that. So it goes back to that. What is your honor? Because when you're silent and someone is doing something that is horrendous, like killing people, for example, you become complicit. You enable that to happen in your world.
Yeah, so I was going to say, in a way, I'd have to say Princeton had a strong effect on you. I mean, school has an effect on all of us, and for you, clearly, it it shaped you in a very strong way. What many people don't know is you actually didn't take you didn't take up journalism in Princeton. You were either
We didn't have a journalism program.
There's that. But you told me you were taking up theater or drama acting. Good God!
I came in as pre-med.
Imagine.
I was pre-med, and then, I finished all the requirements for pre-med in my first 2 years, and then the last 2 years I did what I wanted to do, which was English. I was an English major with a certificate in theater and dance.
Yeah.
My senior thesis was a play that I wrote that was actually brought to the Philippines in 1986, and it was a political allegory. It was very Brechtian. It was a Marcos grandmother figure fighting an Aquino mother figure for a child. That
So
was
in a way,
symbolic
in
of the
college,
Philippines.
you already had political convictions.
I wanted to
Because why
understand.
would you write a play that had an Aquino and Marcos, so to speak, symbolic figurehead?
So I guess it's always micro macro, right? Like people think politics is something that happens outside of them, right? As a journalist, you're taught you write micro macro, right? Case study and then the larger picture. But I think when you move into the world of art, you realize that they converge, right? And for me, I was sorting out my own issues about the family feud that we had,
Yeah.
which was torn by Marcos, by people power, but before people power, when martial law was declared, but also within the context of what I was trying to sort out, which is what happens when you're a child being fought over
Yeah.
by different authority figures. But then you pull it out in a Brechtian mold, and then you have theater. So what is that? Like from personal to macro level, micro and macro, the personal is political, the political is personal.
Why didn't you get into acting as a profession?
Oh my gosh, you have no control. No, no. You know what I learned from acting are all these coping mechanisms. I think that journalists, we were trained to shut off a side that is very important, which is actually how do you decide when someone is lying to you, right? They are all intangible things. They're part of your emotion. There are two types of thinking for a person, right? Thinking fast, thinking slow. This is also what's being manipulated. The thinking fast part are your instincts, your emotions. This is like the part that in many ways is stronger. This is the part. This part is more powerful than the thinking slow part, the rational part. Journalism, democracy, all of these things happen here. But this thinking fast part is potent. It's in your amygdala. So I think part of what will save us now is art and how it pulls it together. And I was saying that.
So it helped you in a way. I'd have to say,
Oh my
your
gosh.
theater background helped you become a better journalist.
Because in two ways, both my theater and the chemistry background, anyway, so the science background also helps. But I think part of what it showed me, so something from acting class, right? Stanislavski method of acting is actually literally like walking in someone else's shoes. If you are acting the part of, if I was acting Karen Davila, I would have to immerse myself in who you are.
Yeah.
Literally walk in your shoes. That's what method acting is.
Yes.
I mean, and we have so many different.
But I'm saying people don't know this about you. That's what's interesting.
I think it all goes back to the same thing of how do you develop empathy and insight,
Yeah.
right? Because in the end, how can you judge someone else if you've never walked in their shoes? Religion does the same thing, right? But the whole thing is about, one, get rid of your ego. That's an important part. Two, get inside someone else, and I think when you're managing a lot of people, which I've learned to do,
Yeah.
you need to get into other people's minds. Otherwise, how do you make the right decisions?
Yeah.
So this is part of the reason I worry about the way we're being governed.
But then your own family life, I've met your family, I've
But you
stayed
can-
with them, and you have a stepfather, you have half sisters. Let's look at Maria internally, growing up. Did that affect you? I mean, you do look different compared to Michelle, for example, one of your siblings, but with your other sister, you look alike. I've stayed in your house, in her place. But the question is, did that shape you in any way, frankly, that you had a stepfather?
Yeah, of course. You know, I grew up, when I was in the Philippines, my parents weren't here. My father died when I was like a year old. And then my mom migrated to the United States, and then they came back to the Philippines in 1973. I think, one, it was a shock to go from the Philippines. My family spoke Tagalog, Filipino. And then when we landed in the States, to be in this classroom, I went to a public school in the middle of winter. It was snowing. My third grade teacher just reminded me how I almost didn't speak for a year.
Oh, wow.
I literally, because there was so much to learn. So I think the biggest lesson first was that there isn't just one view of the world. And maybe that's part of the reason I question everything. My stepfather, he's really my father because he's raised us. You know, he is Italian American, and again, our family life itself was an amalgamation of these different cultures. We were not a normal Toms River family, but what is normal? So I look at that as kind of a great lesson to realize that it's actually a great lesson for a journalist, that there are more than one way, there's more than one way to look at everything, there's more than one way to interpret everything, that you want to actually understand the root causes instead of jumping to conclusions.
Were you ever bullied as a child?
Yes and no. I was a little overachiever.
So you were one of those students.
I was one of those. It's funny because I saw my high school friends came to Boston when I was there for the Harvard Fellowship, and during the lecture they came and we had dinner, and they reminded me of a lot of things. You know, I think when I was younger, I tried to gain acceptance. I felt I needed to prove myself, and you do that by, getting straight A's, by doing a lot of extracurricular things. You have to prove that you belong. But at the same time, when your grades are too good or you're doing too many things, then you're also not quite right, And so what I could do, though, was that I could stand up to bullies. I think it was this was something that
Did you stand up to bullies as a child? Because I found it very difficult. I was bullied. I couldn't stand up to bullies as a child.
Yes, I could stand up to bullies because it goes back to that sense of the golden rule, right? So the story that really crystallized it for me, and I think I said this when I first got to ABS-CBN, I played the violin, I played different instruments. That was how my public school tried to get me to speak. They gave me free piano lessons. I mean, which school does that, right? So I learned
Maria
piano.
Ressa, the violinist.
And so I was playing in an orchestra, and there's this young girl, let's call her Debbie, who everyone picked on. And I never understood why they picked on her. But when someone is being bullied, most of the time, if you're a little scared, you stay away because you don't want to be bullied.
And many kids in school do that.
Well, at a certain point, you can't, because so that's what I did. This was the first time I really did stand up. Because I was coming out of the orchestra room after practice, and she was crying. And so I was like, what do I do? So I went to the bathroom, which was right across, and then I was like, what do I do? Do I help her? Do I talk to her? If I talk to her, I could get bullied. So I went and got tissues, and then I went to talk to her, and I tried to ask her. She was being bullied for something really simple.
But the reason this is important in the interview is it connects to Maria Ressa's lessons of the choices you make each and every day actually define the character that you'll eventually have. I mean, you don't become brave overnight. That's the point.
I don't even know what that word brave means, right? Because in the end, you just do what you're supposed to do, right? You do, And this is actually in a science fiction. Ursula Le Guin has this great quote. You know, some people think like the older you get, the more choices you have in front of you. But the reality is that the older you get, the more your choices narrow. Because really, there's only one path for you to take. And that's the way I feel. Like, for me, the golden rule from when I was a kid is still the golden rule today. And standing up against a bully, when everyone is picking on this person, like, yes, you're afraid, but at the same time, it's like, it was something so stupid, like why she was wearing polyester pants. And I still remember that, right? Which is maybe why I don't like clothes that much. But, you know, it's like, and there was a really good reason. You know, her family couldn't afford it. So anyway, to go back to it, I learned a lesson there because there was that moment when I was afraid that they would turn on me, but then another friend of mine came in to help me. So that's the same lesson, right? Over and over and over. People know what's right.
Yeah. In one of your speeches, you did a TED Talks in Ateneo, and something struck a chord, which I couldn't articulate as a young journalist, but you said, you need to set your boundaries early on. And you know, Filipinos are taught to say yes. When you're a child, yes, do this, yes, do that. But you turned the glass and you said, you have to learn when to say no. And that's not often taught.
My gosh, endemic corruption, say no.
No, exactly.
You know, I mean,
because I think that it was simple, it was powerful. That often is when you become a journalist, you start first with what is the no for me? What can't I do, won't do? Well, and you made that clear.
But that's also, so that goes to the golden rule, to the honor code, to the standards and ethics manual. I think that's why I love journalism, because journalism has a clear code. Okay. And that's part of the
now,
Nobel
journalists
lecture as well.
Aren't perfect. Maria, is there anything you regret as a journalist?
No. You know, you said journalists aren't perfect. That's absolutely correct. And you know how we make up for not being perfect? By being transparent. When you make a mistake, you tell people what it is, right? So the way I look at power is that person holding the power actually needs to turn the guardrails on themselves. Because the people with the greatest power are the ones who must have the most stringent consciences, because they cannot use that power for self-gain. There's that balance, and I guess that's why I called out Mark Zuckerberg, right? Because at a certain point, how much money is worth the destruction of a democracy? When you're leading a country, how many corrupt deals can you do before you say, that's all I'm going to do, because the next generation will suffer? You know, see, this makes me emotional.
I feel you're very emotional right now.
I think that's what the Nobel did.
Yeah. Now, this is coming out Women's Month. Are women better off today than, frankly, 20 years ago?
Okay, so let me just say today women are in many ways worse off than we were a decade ago.
Really?
Yeah, because you know this, right? We tend to be targeted, women journalists in the Philippines are targeted at least 10 times more than men. That's from the data that we have. But globally, women are attacked more than men. And not just journalists, but politicians, right? It's brought out sexism and misogyny in ways that we have not seen, my gosh, since more than a decade ago. So all those gains of the last decade have been rolled back. And then I think the last part here is that what happens when women reporters decide it's too much, or when women politicians say, I don't want to deal with this. This is the impact of the information operations, of the attacks on social media on women. And if this is happening to you, you know, there are many ways you can fight back.
You're not what many would say a stereotypical woman, right?
I wonder what that is.
I know, me too. But then, did you ever at any point when you were when you were fighting out your case, you were asked to speak abroad? I mean, of course, you were talking to investors about Rappler. The point is, you started your own company. Was it difficult being a woman?
No, I mean, look, it's like asking if it's difficult to be a Filipino, or if it's difficult, you are who you are, you embrace who you are, there's strengths and weaknesses. I build a team that minimizes my weaknesses, and together we are stronger together. Look, you asked a question that I need to say, like I need to answer, which is that you have to live a life of no regrets. Because you don't do something today thinking you'll make up for it later on, right? For every moment, every decision you make, you have to say, can I live with this? Is this the best decision I can make? So to go back to the thing of drawing the lines of, remind me this question,
Yes.
of this question?
Yeah, if you have any regrets as a journalist.
No. Every single thing has led to the next thing that has led to the next thing. We talked a little bit about, there's this great quote by T.S. Eliot that I live by. He wrote, in Tradition and the Individual Talent, he talked about the present moment of the past. The idea of that is like, here we are in the present moment of the past. You and I are talking together for Tatler, but this moment is changing our history all the way up to the time when we met in Probe,
Yes.
in ABS,
Yes.
when I went to Rappler, right? So T.S. Eliot talked about it as if you read your latest novel today, it will be affected by the fact that you read Shakespeare. And the way you appreciate Shakespeare is affected by the latest novel you read. That's the continuum of life I look at, right? So I want to live a life of no regrets. And the only way you do that, it goes back to meaning, it goes back to values, it goes back to the golden rule.
If you weren't a journalist today, what would you be?
I don't know. The reason I didn't do theater or music was because it was so focused on one thing, right? Like when I was practicing the piano or the violin for Allstate, I would practice 6 hours a day on that. When you put that much of yourself in, it's just time, right? Then you take away other parts of yourself. That's the first. The other part is that you're building yourself for other people's approval. I really didn't want to live a life like that, right? And it's the same thing I tell to Rappler now. It's about impact in our world. It's about making the world better. It is about leaving it better than when you came into it. So, I'm sorry, I'm not that articulate right now because you're asking me really tough questions.
No, but here's a tough one for you.
Philosophical questions.
No, here's a tough one for you. You're bigger than life. But would Maria Ressa just have a family, have children? Is that something you've even imagined?
In the middle of the breakdown, when Indonesia was falling apart, so after the fall of Suharto in 1998, that was the end of almost 32 years, right? For the next 5 or 6 years, I would be traveling city to city to city, and it would be like violence, 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 right? This is what happens when you oppress a nation, you suppress their tendencies. It all comes erupting like opening Pandora's box. That was the time, and I knew, because I'm very conscious of it. I knew then that I had to make a choice.
Okay.
Because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to have a child anymore.
Okay.
And the choices that I had made, number one is that there were times when I was with CNN that I would be home in my apartment for the entire year, less than 3 months total.
Yeah.
Right? So that was how much I traveled. And the second thing was because I traveled that much, I couldn't keep a cactus alive. Right? Cactus.
And they don't need care.
What about kid?
Yeah. So no, that's an aha moment.
Well,
wherein you knew.
But I still thought about it, right? Because I could track kind of like the breakup of any major relationship to a major story.
Yeah.
Because you throw yourself into the stories. But when it was time, and it was more biological, because I knew I needed to do this, I actually sat down and thought about it. And having a child is choosing different paths from where I am, right? So If I did that, I would not want to be a bad mother, which means I can't keep doing what I'm doing. I can't be the type of journalist I was. And I wasn't ready to do that. You know, maybe I could have raised a fantastic child, but
You would not be living this life today.
I wouldn't be me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be me.
Yeah,
That's one. And then the
that's right.
second part is, I felt it's kind of like choosing the Philippines over the United States. I felt like I could do more good in the Philippines, in a country that was, and I made this choice in 2004, right?
Yeah.
When this is a country that was like building institutions versus the United States, which had built institutions and they were starting to fall apart. Where would I be able to contribute more?
Yeah.
And that was why I decided to come home and head ABS-CBN. So it's the same thing. I felt like, where you only have one life, where will you do it? It's tough to be a mom and to be doing the jobs that we have, right? So I certainly couldn't have done it with CNN. So yeah, no regrets.
Does Maria Ressa believe in God?
Absolutely. Not like you do, but I believe in God.
Yeah.
Look, my grandmother raised me, like we would go to mass every day at 6 a.m. and then at 6 p.m. we would say the rosary. But maybe this is
Wow,
also
this
why,
is surprising for
yeah,
many.
but then think, right, when we moved to the United States, it was like, so what happens? When I got to college, I studied all the world religions. And I got to a point where I'm not an agnostic, but I do believe that certain institutional dogma needs to be taken apart. But at the fundamental level, the God of the 5 religions are pretty identical. I actually really love Buddhism. You know, it's this idea of, well, one of the ones I use all the time in my life is something, have you heard of the empty mirror?
Yes.
So it's like, it's something I strive for, you know, that you can look in a mirror and not see your image in the mirror. And that's a tenet of Buddhism, right?
You know,
so there are lots of things like that, but every religion has it, right? You suppress your ego, you suppress yourself for the greater good. Another easy way after all the dogma is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The golden rule is very good.
You know what's interesting about all this, everything you've said is when you were very young, you had the need to please people, which we all do. And I'm sure at some point in your life that ended. But then you do have Maria Ressa believers, but you also have people who don't believe in Maria Ressa. And I'm sure, I mean, you've heard that they're not just on social media, but people who've also said, why did she win the Nobel? And I know it doesn't matter to you, but how did you deal with that? And sometimes it would hurt because they're Filipinos.
I think I've learned very, very early on that when you do something, when you're responsible for something, there will be people who like what you do and there will be people who hate what you do, right? And that if you listen to that, that only prevents you from doing more. Having said that, there's a difference today because, you know, I, Rappler, ABS-CBN, you, many of the journalists today have been the targets of, and I'm not going to call it disinformation, I'm going to call it information operations, which is disinformation weaponized, right? I have been, sustained attacks beginning in 2016 of almost 90. There was a point that I just had to count because I couldn't respond to it all. Yeah. 90 hate messages per hour. Those aren't real people. That was manufactured. But real people believe it. So in the Nobel lecture, I called it a virus of lies. Why? Because that then allows the government to file 10 arrest warrants against me, right? I'm not the only one. I mean, I mentioned Laila de Lima in the Nobel lecture. I mentioned ABS-CBN because these are egregious. Our society should not have taken these sitting down, and the fact that we did means we have a worse future ahead of us. We must regain and reclaim that democratic ground that's been lost.
How would you convince Filipinos, a majority of Filipinos who may not either understand, agree, or believe in everything you've just said?
So I think the first thing is, let's not get lost in the content, and let's move all the way up to the algorithms that distribute the lies.
So that's the first.
That's the first. You need to move upstream, and then move further upstream to the way our data is being collected, suctioned by AI, organized for these algorithms to manipulate us. This should be controlled, and that's what Shoshana Zuboff writes about, right? Rappler is not going to reach all those people, which is why I talk about having to have coalitions that defend the facts, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things we're doing as a whole, many news groups are coming together. We're building 4 layers come together for the elections. The first layer is fact-checking. ABS-CBN will be part of this, along with Rappler and other news groups. On top of that, we're building what we're calling the mesh. It's civil society groups. We have over 150 different partners already. And this mesh will be, hopefully, the way that we get distribution out. Yeah. On top of that are academic partners who will, with the data we give them, actually show you how you are being manipulated, hopefully on a weekly basis. Yeah. And then on top of that, let's get the lawyers in. Yeah. Because this should not be happening with impunity, right? People should not be getting away. It's like a crime that is happening in plain sight. The more you do it, the more it encourages other people to do it. So that's one. I think the other part is that when I say jump in now, it's very easy if it's only Rappler or ABS-CBN or Anton, only the 3 of us speaking, right? To back, and then it's over. But if it's 1,000 of us, 1,000,000, 2,000,000, then right. You have the ability to protect the facts. So, yeah, I mean, look, we jumped into the fray before we knew how many would jump in. If we were cautious, we wouldn't have done what we did, but then we wouldn't be who we are, right? So I always also talk about this as an individual battle for integrity. Every Filipino should think about that. And then I guess the other part, how do you convince? I mean, let's be real. How much vote buying really happens? How many are really complicit in doing this? How are we going to have the Commission on Elections? How are we going to make sure these processes actually have integrity? We can't even get to this until we get to stopping the lies. And how do we stop the lies? Every Filipino who cares about the truth needs to jump in now.
So will we be seeing more of you in the Philippines? I mean, after winning the Nobel, I can imagine there are opportunities open for you in many parts of the world at this point. Who wouldn't want a lecturer who's a Nobel winner?
I chose the Philippines, right? Look, let's talk about the elections.
We will.
Okay,
but so
all right.
You are not leaving.
You know, this is the moment. So number one, I've committed to this country, right? I mean, I've been asked all the time, why don't you just leave? I'm like,
go to New York.
I know, but Rappler, right? I mean, I threw more of myself into ABS-CBN than I did into myself. I throw more of myself in Rappler than I do. I do try to sleep better now, though. But anyway, you know, we are creating our country today, this moment. What are you doing for that, right? Because that, to me, is the exciting part of where we are. We're really at that breaking point. Do you remember when we went to the safari?
Yeah.
And we were in Tanzania and we were watching the wildebeest migration. And we had stopped the truck and we were looking at the wildebeest trying to cross this ravine, right? And we saw the first people dive and die.
Yeah, no,
I
the
hope
first
that's not
wildebeest.
The first wildebeest, sorry.
The first.
I was going to say, I hope I'm not that person.
Yes.
But the wildebeest, you know, they're eaten by the crocodiles, and then the other wildebeest cross on top of them. That's our history here. We've already done that. Now, are we going to cross across to the other side, right? That's what's at stake for us, you know. Anyway, sorry, I probably shouldn't have gone into,
No,
but
no,
it was
please go
incredible.
on,
That
yeah.
was incredible,
Yes,
right?
yes.
That was a push of migration. That was, anyway. I've chosen the Philippines. I've made my home here. This is all of the lies that are there on social media about me. No, I'm not Indonesian. I can track where that came from. Jason's, I see you. I tweeted that also. But I also,
Jason.
well, you know, I'm not Indonesian. I'm Filipino. I chose this country as my home because I felt that I was old enough to have real experience, but young enough to still want to make it better. That was in 2004. And here I am today, you know.
How important is the upcoming elections? At the end of the day, in a democracy, people choose their leaders.
You cannot have integrity of elections if you don't have integrity of facts. And this brings us back full circle, right? What we have noticed and chronicled, the data is all there, is that the Duterte administration, as well as the Marcos family, have repeatedly used disinformation networks to manipulate Filipinos. That's how we have seen history revised in front of our eyes. It's massive, and this is a challenge. So the question for every Filipino today is, how important are the facts to you? What are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? That's the question I asked in the Nobel lecture, and it is a question that Filipinos need to answer first. Here's what's at stake, again, not just for the Philippines, but for the world, right? If nothing is changed, we will be among the first countries to have elections next in 2022. Following us will be Brazil, Bolsonaro. Following Brazil will be the United States, right? If you don't have integrity of facts, these elections will mean nothing. So here are the Filipino elites talking amongst themselves, not worried about the facts, but we must be, because your businesses will be impacted. Your lives will be impacted. Let's talk about the coronavirus.
Are businessmen doing enough, do you feel, or frankly speaking, have they become complicit for fear of what might happen to their own businesses?
UNESCO gave me the World Press Freedom Prize in 2021, and I called out power and money. This is the time for power and money to take a stand, because if you don't, you just may lose both. You know, the reason why our democracy is as weak as it is today, why did Congress take away the franchise of ABS-CBN? We all know it. We turn away from it. We shouldn't, because this will come to get you.
Maria Ressa, I guess at the end of the day is, what else do you want to do?
Oh my gosh, I want to see a vibrant democracy, working institutions, checks and balances, corruption brought down to sustainable levels, right? That was when I started saying, you know, I was trying to figure out how we got to levels of endemic corruption. It was because everyone said you're foolish if you don't. It needs to be turned upside down. Doing good, doing the right thing needs to be enough of an incentive to keep our people in the Philippines building a better world. So ang dami kaya, Karen? We need to use technology to fight technology. We can't be manipulated. We can't be treated like Pavlov's dogs, which is what the Philippines has become for a company like Facebook. Yes, we're partners with Facebook also, you know, and you can do both, right? I'm so worried about the next generation, the age of your kids who are growing up on social media, who are shaped by social media. And what does social media reinforce? It is the worst of human nature. It rewards anger, hate, nastiness, right? At a scale that I didn't think was Filipino. So what do I want?
Yeah.
So much!
So are you still optimistic? I think, very quickly.
Yeah, we have to be optimistic. Otherwise, I mean, there's nothing left, right? Like I said, I've lived my life with no regrets. And that's part of the reason we took the position we did in Rappler. Because I also know that we're on the right side of history. And, you know, please don't leave us hanging. What will you sacrifice for the truth? You got to do it. This is it. Guys, if you're listening, Avengers Assemble. This is the moment.
So Maria Ressa, thank you for being with us today, and thank you for being a beacon of light. I'm Karen Davila for Tatler Talks.